I'm going to tell you what my least favorite time of the year is. What do you think it is? It's stewardship season. And why is that? Because I'm uncomfortable speaking to people about money. Right? Do you ever get uncomfortable with that? I do.
Yes.
Especially as a minister, I stay as far away from that as possible so that I could focus on the ministry. But one of the things that I have learned is how we give, what we give, why we give matters. Not because God needs it, but it matters. It matters in the soul and in the heart of everything we are. And so yesterday I was looking through all these anecdotes and illustrations and reading from here to there. And you know who I came across was Yakov Smirnoff. Anybody ever hear that name? So Yakov Smirnoff is talking about his friends, his fellow communists. Forgive me on this Veterans Day for making mention of that. But he was making mention of it happens all around the world when we talk about money. And so he said, I was talking to my friend, and I said to my comrade, if you have 2 houses, would you give me one? He says, of course, you're my fellow comrade. I would give you my 2nd house. And so he said to his friend, well, if you had 2 cars, would you give me your other car? Of course you would. We're fellow communists. Of course we would do such a thing. And then he said, well, if you had 2 chickens, he's like, stop. Cut it out. I have 2 chickens. And that's how we feel a lot of times. We talk about if we hit the lottery or we do this, we're going to do something for somebody. And many times, even when they do that, they never make good on the promises they get, even when you win $500 million. Now, why is that? What's the reason behind it? Why is it so touchy with us? And I'm going to tell you it's all about our faith. Jesus says the reason they could not cast out that demon, even being so close to Christ, was they were living near Christ, but they were not expressing the faith that he was trying to place inside of them. Faith is not something that lies dormant. Faith is something like a rubber band. Rubber bands aren't meant to just sit there. They have a purpose. And that rubber band is meant to stretch beyond its normal place. Its whole purpose is to be stretched. Its whole purpose is to come to that place where it fulfills its purpose by getting outside of its comfort zone. Now, I'm not talking about money. I've moved on from that. Just so you know. But I am talking about faith. And Jesus says this, and it's very, very interesting. And then I'm going to come back to the other scriptures, and I'm going to start to layer this building on top of the foundation that Christ began with. Because you have so little faith, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. You say, what's a mustard seed? I would say, what's an atom? When you split an atom, it becomes quite explosive. The power inside of an atom is so strong that it could change the course of the world. Jesus shows them something they can see, but is very small. If you have faith the size of this little mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be thou removed, and it will move. Now, it's easy for the pastor behind here to talk. You're all quiet. We were all taught to be quiet, sit still, look forward, right? It's easy for me to say, and in the scripture lesson today, we have 2 doozies. It says, sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain. God is faithfully feeding Elijah, a great prophet, waiting on God each and every day, and God is feeding him in a supernatural way during drought and famine. And it's going well. But he's at this particular brook. It's a seasonal brook, and the water runs out. It hasn't been raining, and God sends him to a place of discomfort. Now listen to the story. It says, then the word of the Lord came to him, go at once to Zarephath. Now, if you understand why this flood came, this drought came, the people of Israel were living in such opposition to what God had called them to do, was living in such a level of idolatry, that God brought the prophet and spoke that it will not rain until I say so. And it didn't. But Zarephath was the center of all of this idolatry, holding things of the world or money or whatever possession you have above God. And so here they are. God sends him into the center of it, and the king is looking for him. Now, in this place, there's a widow. And of all the places to be sent to be provided for by, it's a widow and her son. God sends him there and says, I have directed a widow to feed you, to take care of you. And so he gets there, and he goes in faith, and this is what it says. He goes to Zarephath. Now, by the way, just so you know, I've been teaching this for a while about what the name Jehovah means. It's the relational, self-sustaining God who keeps his promises. Elijah's name means Jehovah is my God. The God who's relational and relatable to me. The God who keeps his promises is my God. And God sends him into this place in an uncomfortable situation. He meets this woman who's in the same despair as he is. There's nothing left. And he goes to her and he says, would you bring me a little jar of water? Which she does. And as she's doing, he says, oh, and by the way, would you bring me a piece of bread, please? And then her pain, her suffering, what she is going through, what's going on inside of her heart comes out. I could have given you the water, but I can't give you the bread, and here's why. All I have is a little bit of flour. All I have is a little bit of oil. I was just getting ready to make a little bit of bread that me and my son may die. Isn't that the most horrible thing you've ever heard? Elijah then, knowing that she was directed by God and knowing his place in this situation, as uncomfortable as that rubber band is being stretched for the preacher, speaks the word of the Lord to her and says, as surely as the Lord your God, she said to him, as surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful. He says, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, circle it. But first, make a small piece of bread from what you have and bring it to me. Stop. Now I want to go to the next story. Elisha has a woman who's in trouble. She's another widow, and her husband had debts, and he has died. And now her and her children are about to be sold into indentured servanthood until that price could be paid off. She's in desperation here, and she cries out to the prophet of God, and she says, you know, my husband loved the Lord, and here I am. We are in distress, crying out. This is what Elisha says to her. And his name means, God is my salvation. Let me define it a little further. God is my deliverance. God speaks in many ways to us that sometimes we don't pay attention. She says to her, how can I help you? And then he stops and says, tell me, what do you have? Elisha asked, what do you have? Elisha asks, what do you have? In both occasions, they're told to go and do exactly what you are told with what you have. When they do that, the miracle comes. When they take what they have, and it doesn't look like much, in their distress, in their trouble, in their time, they offer it up to holy God, who is able to do anything that you could possibly ask for or imagine, and beyond it, even something the size of a mustard seed, and do something amazing like move a mountain. I want to share a story with you. Back in World War II, there was a plane. I'm trying to think what it was called. Was it called the Tondileo? I can't remember, but it got hit while it was flying a mission over Germany. And they thought it was only hit once, but when they landed it, they found out there was not just one shell in the gas tank, but 11. When those 11 shells were pulled out, the pilot wanted to know more. They wouldn't tell him until after the war, but after the war, intelligence let him know that every single one of those shells that hit their gas tank, which would have blew it to smithereens, just one, were empty, clean on the inside, as shiny as it gets. But inside of one of them, there was something. There was a little letter, and inside of it said, "This is all we can do for you for now." These were folks in a conquered area of the world under a dictatorship, and they were being forced to labor on behalf of those who oppressed them. But what they did, at the cost of maybe their lives and so much more, they made those shells and capped them off and made them look like they were good. But in fact, they were actually part of the war effort with what they had. They gave what little that they had. And lives were saved. And part of that was added to how the war was won. Now you would say, I don't have much. I may be older, I may be younger, I may be disabled, I may have issues. But there were two men at Kent University back in the day, and they met each other on the stairs. There was a blind man, and he was trying to get down to the stairs to his class, but he could not see where he was going. He was new to the school. He happened to come across another man who helped him down the stairs into his class. They just so happened to be going to the same class. They created a friendship and a bond. The funny thing about that bond, it led to other things. This man who was blind ended up graduating at the top of his class, not because he could see, not because he was without difficulty, but because he was intertwined with a specific friend who could do something more for him than he could do. But that particular friend, we find out later, actually had no arms. He offered what little he had to someone who needed it. And together they bonded such a relationship, they actually went to a school of law and created a law office, which is still spoken about this day. One man who couldn't see, one man who didn't have any arms at all. But together, they made an impact on the world. Are you getting it? I'm trying to stretch your faith a little bit today. The Apostle Paul, it was pledge season here in 2 Corinthians. And it says, I visit you in advance to finish the arrangements for the gift that you have promised. He says, whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. It doesn't say whoever has a lot or a little. He's saying whatever you have, sow it. Whatever God has given to you, sow it, and you will reap sparingly. He says each of you should give what you have decided in your heart, not reluctantly, or not with a pastor online telling you if you give $1,000, you're going to get some type of healing. We're not talking about that. God is saying, what do you have in your hands? What has God placed in your heart? What do you see in the world? Even if you do not have arms, you can help a blind man down the stairs. You could establish a friendship that lasts forever. And pastors, for years to come, will be preaching it in the pulpit about how far it's gone. This is what he says. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, and at all times, whether it's war, whether it's plenty, whether you're working in a factory under a dictator, in all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. The folks in that Czech factory that made those shells, did their work abound and bless others? Yes. He goes on to say this, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and take care of you. You'll be enriched in every way, so be generous as you can on every occasion, so that through your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. And this is what it says. The service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of your service, because of you sharing your faith with others, your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else, this is what it says. Their prayers go up for you. Their hearts are full because of the surpassing grace God has given you it is now overflowing in the lives of the people around you. Thanks be to God for this inexpressible gift. Now, God did a miracle in 2 Kings. The creditors were paid, but God didn't stop there. Now, if she only filled 1 jar, 2 jars, 3 jars, she would have had 3 jars. But she was told to go to house to house to house and get everybody's empty jars. Not 1, not 2, not 10, a lot. If she didn't do what she was asked to do, would those jars have been filled with oil? Would the provision have come? It takes faith. And sometimes God allows us to be very uncomfortable. And the reason is God is stretching us. Our life is a faith life. Our life is a rubber band life. We are meant to be stretched. And the more we stretch, the more we see the miracles of God. The more we see the work of God. We have seen miracles this week and people that we've been praying for. We've seen miracles in this week. Things that seemed impossible or hard, somehow, in the hands of God, become something. What's the message this morning? A shout? Remember that shout? If they didn't shout, would the walls of Jericho fallen down? If they didn't take the 5 loaves and 2 fish and offer them up, would that have multiplied and fed 5,000? If she didn't fill the jars, would she have been provided for? If she didn't bake the little cake of bread out of what little she had, and believe me, that was a stretch, would she have been provided for? Now, God takes care of us. But God wants to increase our faith. I may have shared this a little while ago, but I love this. I'm going to share 2 things and then I'll close. I know what time it is. I love this one because I like to look at my wife when I read this. It's a love letter. A man one day was writing to the love of his life. Let's just say his name was Richard. And this darling of a lady was named Stephanie. And he writes this, "My dearest Stephanie, I love you beyond words. Webster's dictionary doesn't have the necessary vocabulary to explain the depth of my love for you. Thoughts of you dance across the portals of my mind." Are you uncomfortable yet? "You are my all-consuming passion. I am enraptured by you. If the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean were all in front of me, I would swim them just to get to you. If Mount Everest was before me, I would climb to the highest peak just to spend time with you." Are you uncomfortable? "Climbing Mount Everest would only seem like I was getting over an anthill because I knew you were at the precipice. All I am simply saying to you, my darling Stephanie, is that my love for you transcends time and space. Signed, the love of your life, Richard. P.S. I'll see you Saturday night if it doesn't rain." Isn't that what we do with God? I will do this, but I will do this, I will do whatever, ask me to do whatever, I'll climb the highest mountain, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, and then we say, ah. So let me close with this. God is challenging you. Not for fancy writing or love letters that come to nothing if it rains. What God is calling us is to take what little you have, even in the distress of these times, and place it before God in whatever is on your heart. Yes, God loves a cheerful giver. Yes, that is true. But that's not what I'm talking about. All of this is getting down to the deep parts of our faith. And so there's a man in the desert of his life. He's crawling through the Sahara, trying to find a place, and he is lost. It is hot. He is dehydrated. There is nothing to be seen forever. He is praying and praying and praying, and out in the distance, he sees through the wind and the sand, it looks like some sort of a structure. He gets to the structure, and he sees that it's just some walls, an old shack. The windows are gone. They've been blown out by the wind. The roof has been torn off. He goes inside for a little bit of shelter, and he's thankful for that. But as he's peering out the hole which once was a window with glass, he sees that there is a water pump just 15 feet away from this little shack. Crawling over to it with everything he's got, he begins to pump away at it. And nothing's coming out at all. Going and going, he just falls to the ground and says, I give up. As he falls down, his hand hits off of something. It's hard, it's solid, and he realizes it's a jug. And this jug has water in it, and it's filled almost to the top. He's just so relieved that the water is there. He goes to pull the cork off, and he sees that there's a note on it. And it says, to prime the pump, you need to pour all of the water into it. Now he has this dilemma. He doesn't know if this old letter or these old words that were written long ago matter to him now or are relevant now. But he has a choice whether to believe these words and pour that water, which will restore his life for a time, into that pump. But it is a leap of faith. And he goes back and forth for some time, and he decides, I'm going to pour it in. And as he's pouring it in, he's like, please God, please God, please God. And he pours it into the pump. And he begins, as he finished pouring it in, to pump on that primer. Nothing comes out. Squeak, 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 and then there's a little drop, and then there's a little more, and then it's kind of a gush, and then it's overflowing. Not only does he fill that container once again, he drinks it all. Not only does he fill that container once again, he drinks it all again, and now he's refreshed. Not only does he fill it again, but this time he places the cork on top of it, cleans it all off, and he writes something else underneath it. He's got his own P.S. He's like, it's true. You better believe it. These words are true. But you have to give it all to get it to come out. God has called us today. What gift can we bring? What present, what token? God doesn't need any of it. It's all about our adoration to God. It's all about the mission that we carry out here. It's all about the gospel that we share with one another. Inflation goes up, and we get quiet. But God takes the opportunities of our life in the most stressful situations and creates the most beautiful miracles. And I said opportunities for a reason. When you're in distress, that is the greatest opportunity for a miracle in your life. Whether it's giving a word of comfort when you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody, whether it's sending a note, whether it's sending groceries over to somebody, and by the way, Betty Gronsky's coming home on Monday, let's send her dinner. We have folks in Wesley who could use we can do things for folks. It's not just on the pastor, it's us together as a group. Can I share one more thing? Sure. Raise your hand if you're sure. So, I don't know if you ever heard of Andor Folds. Musicians may have. Very fantastic pianist. I was just thinking of this while I was going over this. Andor Folds was distressed and down. He was a very young man, but he was a brilliant pianist. And he wanted to quit. And there was a man named Emil von Sawyer, a wonderful pianist, and he learned under the great Franz Liszt. And he was the last surviving pupil of this particular beautiful pianist. And he heard about this young man who was in distress and asked him to come and play for him. He actually came all the way from Budapest, this is in Hungary, and traveled sometime to hear this young man play, in distress and wanting to quit and wanting to give up forever. He plays for Emil von Sawyer, and I can't say these German words very good. He plays for him so well, and Emil keeps pushing him. He has him play the hardest works of Bach, the hardest works of Beethoven, the hardest works of Schumann, and these are all there. At the end of it, Emil von Sawyer comes to Andor Folds, places his hands on the side of his face, blesses him and kisses him on his forehead. And he said, "Take good care of that kiss and pass it on to someone you inspire. For that came from my teacher, and my teacher received it from Beethoven. You pass on this sacred blessing that is now given to you. And God has called us all to sacred work with what little we have, and placed in God's hands, it will provide beyond anything we can ask for or even imagine. Do you believe it today? I hope so. I do. And so our closing hymn today